Invincible Season 4 continues with Episode 5, Give Us a Moment. Probably my favorite episode so far this season, maybe my favorite episode in the entire series. It's up there. An outstanding episode that propels the story forward into super exciting and terrifying territory, but not before delivering some of the most effective dramatic sequences and down-to-earth moments we've seen so far. To me, this really is an episode that exemplifies everything that Invincible has to offer, and it leaves us in one of the most suspenseful places the show ever has. So let's dive into Invincible Season 4, Episode 5, Give Us a Moment. And another heads up, I, like many fans, am not reading ahead in the comics. I read the corresponding issues after I've seen the episodes to avoid spoilers, and I'd like to kindly request that you don't spoil ahead for myself or any other viewers who are watching that way. And keep in mind that that means I'll be speculating without any foreknowledge of the comics as well. But if you do like the breakdown and speculation, I've covered the show a lot in the past, plan to cover more in the future, including this entire season and probably the rest of the series moving forward. So if you're interested, click the subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Thanks. So obviously this week is picking up exactly where our last episode left off. Nolan has returned to Earth to recruit Mark against the Viltrumites. And obviously this development is crazy and exciting for the story moving forward. And while this thing absolutely delivers once they get rolling, personally, I love this episode for everything that comes before we leave Earth. There's just such dramatic weight to every single character interaction and dynamic with Nolan's return. Nolan reveals the truth about the Viltrumite expansion to Mark, that having kids with other species was more or less an experiment to see if they can prolong Viltrum's existence after the Scourge. I do think that Nolan's transparency in this episode is pretty interesting. It feels like there's a world where he could have recruited Mark just by making it clear that the Viltrumites will return and threaten his family, but he really just goes into full detail not just about their motivations, but his own previous behaviors and actions. This scene is heavy for a lot of reasons. Obviously, there's the weight of the danger they're facing, but Mark also thought Nolan was dead after their interactions in season 2, and Mark's relationship with Nolan continues to feel more and more complicated. It feels like he firmly believes that Nolan can never really make any of his wrongs right, but he also seems to continue to allow him into his life in certain ways. He's not fully icing him out. Mark's one request before leaving, to give them one last night on Earth, is what makes this episode truly stand out. Every single scene that happens during this last evening on Earth hits so hard and covers such a wide variety of emotional peaks and valleys, starting with Nolan's painful request to see Debbie. Probably the best scene in the episode, maybe the best scene in the series. Holy shit, it's so good. I know people rip on this show's casting tendencies, but Sandra Oh delivers such a powerhouse performance in this scene. I don't understand how you could ever complain about it again. Genuinely outstanding stuff. Every detail in this sequence is so titillating. Nolan walking up to the door before almost walking away, which in itself I think says a lot about his mindset. Really at odds over whether apologizing to Debbie is actually something he's doing for her or for himself. Debbie opening the door silently, leaving it open, and walking back into the house. Whew. I love how messy this scene is, and while obviously there's not any real world parallel to the scale of damage caused by Nolan, at the heart of this sequence is simply a man who fucked up his relationship beyond repair. It's something we see in movies, TV show, and real life all the time, on obviously a much smaller scale. Nolan made irreparable mistakes and lost the life he had, and this is a scene where he has to reconcile with the fact that he cannot get it back. But I do find the details so damn compelling because I really do think that Nolan is earnest and honest here. I think we have seen him show genuine remorse and regret, and he is trying to do the right thing to make up for that. But of course, there is no real way to make up for or undo the pain and destruction he has caused, both on a global level and within the people who loved him. And despite the fact that I think he's acting genuinely here, this is obviously just an insurmountable uphill battle. And he also makes a clear misstep when he says he's trying to repair the damage he's done. Debbie rightfully tears him a new one because the idea that there is any way to repair what he has done is simply delusional. I love that she just completely cuts to the core of Nolan here. He is a guy who has basically never had to face something he cannot overcome. Being as powerful and capable as he was, especially relative to anyone on Earth, for the last 20 years, he could just do anything. And he is, for the first time, being faced with something that there is simply nothing he can do to overcome. He cannot make Debbie look at him the same way again. He cannot make Earth see him as their savior again. He cannot make Mark love him the same way again. The man who was all capable is suddenly incapable. In a way, this is sort of like parallel, but also sort of inverse to what many Superman adaptations do. Superman is obviously similarly capable and powerful, but the thing that cuts to his core in a profound way is his father's death. I personally think the adaptations that have Jonathan Kent die from a simple heart attack are what get at the idea the best, because it is not something that Clark could prevent. It was a random, cruel act of fate that he couldn't punch or fly or heat blast the solution for. The idea is that despite all of Clark's abilities, there are some things he cannot change. And ultimately, that loss is part of what motivates him as a hero. And it's kind of interesting to see this show facing Nolan with that same dilemma, except instead of a random fateful event, it's the consequences of his own actions. Obviously, these two things come from very different places. But interestingly, this is also something that is sort of motivating him in his slightly more heroic path. But back to the scene, it is all a Debbie showcase, finally getting to let out that unfathomable pain and heartbreak that she experienced through the events of the first season. It's equal parts heartbreaking and cathartic, and she does not hold back remotely, telling Nolan that he killed the man she loved, that they had everything, and thanks to him, it is all gone, that he is nothing but a bad photocopy of a human being. I particularly love the detail that she hurts herself while hitting Nolan in anger here and refuses to let him comfort her, an example of something simple that he took for granted, a clear indicator that she is deadly serious in everything she is saying to him. This is a tour de force performance from Sandra Oh, and a showcase of why it's almost impossible to overstate how important Debbie is to the narrative of this show.
Now get the fuck out of my house and never come back.
I also love where this lands in Debbie's arc and story in this season. It's all happening just before she moves out of this house and in with Paul. This almost needed to happen here, a full circle moment, some semblance of closure as Debbie officially moves on from the part of her life that she spent with Nolan. But I think the anxiety she is feeling in the immediate aftermath of this confrontation is so heavy, fearing that after destroying her life, Nolan has returned to take the few things she has left. Being a mom to superheroes cannot be for the weak. I also really love the direction they're going with Oliver here. Obviously, last season his journey was sort of about finding his humanity at his young age, and the fear that he is or would be too much like Nolan. And though he does sort of still feel like that angry and rash young kid, his motivations all seem to be coming from a place of personal connection in a way that I find really endearing and positive. Personally, I am not sure Oliver should be going on this mission, but I love his justification in not taking no for an answer, and I also love that the lore of his species makes this such a unique circumstance for the character. We know that Oliver remembers everything, even from when he was a baby, so he not only has memories of his mother and Nolan together, but he must remember the events of Thrax's destruction so vividly, and remember the fact that he was too young to be able to do anything about it. To remember something so traumatic and horrifying in full detail, knowing there was nothing you could do, that has to be such a heavy thing to carry for such a young kid. Oliver's assertion that he needs to go with because he couldn't defend his Thraxan mother Andressa from the Viltrumites, and now needs to defend his new mother from them, is both beautifully in character and a sign of growth and development. It's the combo of Nolan's return and the fact that Mark and Oliver are about to leave Earth heading straight for unimaginable peril that makes all of these Earth scenes in the first half of the episode so outstanding. Some of my favorite in the entire series, easily, not the least of which is Nolan's reunion with Art. Honestly, even just on its face, I love that Nolan's first instinct after being dressed down by Debbie is to go to the person who was probably his next closest confidant in his old life. I feel like these are all just little hints that no matter what Nolan told himself or how deeply that Viltrumite indoctrination ran in his blood, his time on Earth was slowly, subtly changing him when he was there. Now that we're on the other side of season 1, or the events of season 1, Nolan sees Art as this sort of place of comfort from his old life, and he goes there at one of his most emotionally vulnerable times. But he also seems kind of incapable of realizing how immensely things have changed. I love the way this scene feels, because part of me likes seeing Nolan find his humanity, likes seeing real emotional human connection from him, but just like that scene with Debbie, the looming shadow of his previous actions, it's just so obviously too much to overcome. The banter and discussion between him and Art feels good in the moment. Art sort of probing about Oliver, talking about Paul, and Nolan seemingly being happy for Debbie's newfound love and happiness. It feels like old friends catching up, even with the unfathomably large elephant on the planet. But it's the final exchange that I think is just so biting and feels like a continuation of what I was mentioning earlier during the Debbie sequence. It's the inverse Superman thing. Nolan needing to come to terms with the fact that he has done things he cannot fix, changed certain things irreparably. Nolan apologizes to Art for quote-unquote everything, but I love Art's response here. He reluctantly responds, but he doesn't accept any apologies. When Nolan says he's trying to make up for the things he's done, Art just says, good. And he has to walk this insanely delicate tightrope. It feels like Nolan is looking for something, anything that might go back to the way it was. And when he says Art can eventually make a new suit for him any way he likes, Art straight up tells him no. I especially found this interesting for Art because obviously the safe thing to do in this circumstance would be to sort of brush it off and humor Nolan before he left. But he really pointedly tells Nolan that he can't work with him anymore. The biting line being that he dresses heroes. Man, I really love this episode. And of course, Art's full-on hyperventilation the moment Nolan leaves, revealing how horrifyingly on edge he was the whole time. If he had a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, I bet it would have been telling him to go to the hospital with his elevated heart rate. I mean, Art must have felt like he was sitting next to a voice-activated atomic bomb, and that he was forced to keep talking without knowing what the activation phrase was. It's been cool to see people discuss so many of these scenes. They are genuinely all so great. But I think the one that I found most affecting and that I haven't really seen people dive into is the simple little dinner montage. Debbie's one request before Mark and Oliver leave Earth is to have one normal family dinner together. I mentioned this in last week's breakdown, but it really is these little human moments of connection that add the stakes that make the rest of the show so impactful. Mark and Oliver going off to fight an intergalactic war wouldn't matter to me if I didn't care about what they or their loved ones had to lose in the process, what they're risking. And these small little sequences just fully exemplify those things. We also got a very touching little scene with Mark and Eve in bed. Obviously a scene that needed to happen given that she still hasn't told him about the pregnancy, but I like that this put a little more focus on Eve's fears surrounding Mark's forthcoming crusade, particularly given that Rex, her previous serious boyfriend's body, is barely even cold at this point. And while I am glad that this was the focus of this scene, it does feel a tiny bit hollow to me. I sort of wish there was just a little more edge, drama, emotions to these fears. It seems like this is just so much to be weighing on Eve, and obviously not telling Mark about the pregnancy is so that he can go on this mission without lingering thoughts distracting him. But it all feels the tiniest bit sterile. They are both so level-headed about this stuff that it's almost a little boring. And honestly, the one thing that's really bumming me out about this season is the sidelining of Eve. It definitely all serves the drama of the season, the non-stop stake raising, the relentless danger, the limited defenses and weapons, but I wish we were getting more Eve in some way since she's being so intentionally sidelined from the action. Maybe we should have gotten a bit more of her last week during the Hell adventure, reconciling with her pregnancy situation instead of just a single conversation with William. But regardless, this is a minor complaint in a season that is otherwise mostly really working for me. This episode really is a tale of two halves. While both halves are excellent, things really start moving once Mark and Oliver leave Earth. One detail I loved was Oliver asking how he breathes in space, with Mark responding, "That's the neat thing," which was word for word the same exchange between Mark and Nolan back in season 1 when Mark had to face off against Alan for the first time. The other big introduction in this episode is Tech Jacket, who we caught a small glimpse of in season 3. This is apparently a gender-swapped version of the character character from the comic books, and Robert Kirkman did weigh in on why they opted to change the character in a Den of Geek interview. When it came time to introduce Tech Jacket, I realized that if we had brought him straight to comics, he'd be very similar to Mark. He went on to say, the vibrancy of that character and the energy that she brings is so much more affecting coming from Zoe Dutch. She's just a really, really cool character that we're having a ton of fun with. I haven't read Tech Jacket, but it's super interesting that the initially brief comic run actually predated Invincible's first issue, and the character was then later incorporated into that world. I think Robert Kirkman, looking at some of the ideas he was exploring back in the early 2000s and realizing that there were a lot of similarities between Mark and Zach, is a pretty reasonable motivation to change things up for the show. I mean, look, I was confused as hell by Best Tiger's cameo during the Invincible War last season, because that fully looks like an Invincible variant just with guns. So I ultimately think this was a good move for characterization and simple visual variation. Not to mention, I just really enjoyed the character here. She is incredibly charming and likable, she adds a unique flavor to the team dynamic, and there's also the clear little flirtatious moments between her and Oliver, which I'm all for, though I do know some of this show's audience is not huge fans of when teenage romantic drama and superheroism intersect, but I liked seeing them play video games and laugh at the dinner table, and I also really enjoy the dynamic she has with Alan in the post-credits scene, but we'll get there later. I also really want to talk about Nolan's attitude and demeanor on the ship/mission. Obviously, I've found Mark and Nolan's arcs the most narratively and thematically compelling this entire series, but I think this is pretty easily the most fascinating Nolan development to dig into so far. He is a man that is just completely at odds with himself. That newfound sense of trickling morality battling with his 1,000-year Viltrumite indoctrination, his attempts to not repeat his mistakes with Mark, sort of leading him to potentially repeat them with Oliver, and of course, as we've talked about a lot in this video, the reconciliation that he has finally found something he cannot really overcome. Nolan's angry, fearful reaction to Mark bringing Oliver along, to me, does show how different he is in season 4 than he was in season 1. Nolan is looking at all the damage he has caused in the lives of those closest to him, and he's basically determined that he should just not be in Oliver's life at all, that he should spare him any involvement, which, while understandable, is also kind of cowardly. Admission that he doesn't think he can do better. But I love Oliver continuing to stand up for himself and for his mothers, even up against his father. There's such a great cross-section of different dynamics here, and there's a real irony that by trying not to damage Oliver the way he did Mark, he's kind of actively damaging him. Self-fulfilling prophecy. Now look, in no way am I trying to have some kind of Nolan pity party. The man single-handedly did like multiple 9/11s. But I think the reason this show is so interesting is because it lets us explore his psyche in an incredibly heightened, very fictional place. Centuries-long indoctrination to a single mind, there's not really a real-world equivalent to that. And so having that character come to the realization that everything he had known, everything he was taught, everything he was made to stand for is straight up evil, and that there actually is more to life, that he has spent 1,000 years living wrong, it's heavy. I like that the show is allowed to say, how would that guy respond to that realization? How would it mess with his head? How would he try to move forward? It's the kind of stuff modern superhero movies don't really touch on as in depth. I know it's not a one-to-one, but like, if you're a winter soldier, are you responsible for the people you kill while you're winter soldiering? What do you do after you break free of the sleeper agent role? In the MCU, you apparently just run for Congress after that. It's cool that it seems Nolan is both going to have to accept that he will never be able to fix the damage he did. He will always have to live with the unimaginable carnage and harm he caused the world, while also using what is left of his life to try and stop it from ever happening again. And along the way, I love the personal drama that haunts him over it. Another of my favorite scenes is when he goes to use the food processor and makes this gross protein pasta stuff, which just transports him in his mind back to one of his early dates with Debbie. It's such a small, simple scene that doesn't really hold any major insight outside of just showing an instance where Nolan made real human connection. To me, this is Nolan looking back and realizing the different paths he could have taken, realizing that that human connection could have been the thing to make him see there's more to life. This, could have been a fulcrum point, a moment where he realized that he could have had a different future, but he didn't. And now that his heart has even just slightly shifted, he has to live with the atrocities he committed and the regret that he gave up a life worth living. I mean, it probably would have just been easier for him to stay evil, right? I know people really like the superhero action in this show, but I just want to reiterate over and over that that stuff, including the incredible ending to this episode, doesn't really mean anything without this buildup. And to me, that's why this is among the greatest episodes in the series, because when the Viltrumites finally do attack this ship, there are stakes. For one, Mark is just like instantly compromised, realizing that Conquest is still alive. I'm sure he has his suspicions as to how he survived, but in that moment, he was for sure just feeling like he was seeing a ghost. But I think what really ramps up the drama here is Conquest immediately going for Oliver, who he nearly killed at the end of season 3 in a sequence that had me fully squirming in my seat. One of the most viscerally memorable moments in the entire show for me. Honestly, Oliver gets some good licks in here. He's really gotten a lot stronger and faster, but I really like the Grayson interplay in the fight sequence. Nolan saving Oliver in their first real father-son moment since Thraxa, but Oliver also sort of resenting him for trying to step in and help him during the fight. Just good familial drama. Obviously, the Mark and Conquest rematch is the thing everybody is talking about, and for good reason. And even though I did say how annoyed I was by Conquest immediately escaping after being defeated in the season 3 finale, and this rematch is happening only 4 episodes after their last fight, I have to admit that its place in Mark's arc is pretty perfect. Right after that first glint of optimism and hope from Mark in nearly like a full season, he is confronted with the exact thing that would push him over the edge. The guy that nearly killed him, his brother, his girlfriend, is still actively threatening those things all to his face. It is the perfect scenario for Mark to actually let loose and not hold back even a single punch, putting a true end to this guy. And sheesh, I am admittedly far less attracted to the hyper-violent aspects of this show than I am the themes and personal drama. So when I say I struggled through the brutality of Mark and Conquest's final confrontation, I really mean it. I loved the drama and tension and suspense of the scene, but my god, I watched most of that last part through my fingers, and I cannot possibly show any of it on screen here either. It is just a disgustingly violent cherry on top of what was, without question, one of the best episodes of Invincible, as Mark manages to kill Conquest, but not without spilling his guts first. And look, there is just no question that Mark had to kill Conquest here. He 100% did the right thing. Hell, he thought this was the second time he had done it. But coming on the heels of the escalating trolley problems in the season, adding a bit more personal stakes, and coming immediately after that first glint of hope, it's an unfortunate combination that this is where Mark was seeing red. And I guess Conquest was seeing red too. I think what we've got set up for the next episode is really interesting. Nolan and Oliver stranded on a planet while Mark is presumably healing if he's not dead. But with the tensions between them starting to boil, this is just a really great setup for more drama. A desert island episode, except it's a planet and a superhuman father-son duo who barely know each other and have a lot of beef. Good stuff. Tech Jacket and Alan are in another super precarious position, hiding attached to the Viltrumite ship, praying they aren't going straight to Viltrum. Things really just get more and more dire every episode, and I'm always impressed that they manage to continue to escalate. I said it before, but this is one of, if not my favorite episode in the entire series. It contains everything I love most about Invincible in a perfect, concise package. Just outstanding storytelling, personal drama, world building, and action. And if this is just past the midway point in the season, I'm incredibly eager to see what the hell is in store for us the next few weeks. But that's all I've got for you. How did you feel about this episode? Did you think it was as perfect as I did? Let me know below in the comments, and stay tuned for more. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny two cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny two cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.